Physicists have an interesting concept called a thought experiment. For example, Einstein made extensive use of such techniques when studying various questions. A thought experiment isn't just imagination, it's a way of modeling a process based on real knowledge we've already accumulated. And today I suggest we also conduct an interesting thought experiment. Let's imagine that we've shrunk down to the size of an atom and are trying to study atomic worlds, trying to study the atoms themselves, trying to see something in this world around us. The very same Heisenberg uncertainties, the Pauli exclusion principle, and various other effects that exist at this level play absolutely no role in our everyday lives. And for the most part, it doesn't matter to us whether there is some uncertainty or not, whether the observer effect applies to us or not. And that's all because in the macroscopic world, the observer effect essentially means nothing to us. And we only start thinking about such phenomena when we dig deeper, when we try to figure something out and try to understand the very structure of the universe. That's when this knowledge appears for us. Or when, in fact, we try to use particle physics in order to work with it in practice. A huge number of interactions that exist there simply do not exist for us right now. But at the scale of an atom, we will definitely feel it. And it won't be pleasant for us. There, the most fascinating and possibly not very pleasant processes will take place. And one of the main processes we will encounter is essentially the impossibility of seeing what exists at that scale. We assumed that we shrink down to the size of an atom, which means all our sensors and our entire body structure also shrink to the size of an atom. In fact, technically, this is impossible to do. But let's suppose that by some magical means we found a way and turned into essentially what we are now, just at a much smaller size. And here we encounter the first problem we have. We won't be able to see the atom for the same reason that an atom can't be seen with an optical microscope. Essentially, there's an interesting phenomenon. Light waves, just like other types of waves, can bend around objects. Light rays will bend around atoms, and as a result, we won't get any images. And that's exactly why, in order to study the structure of the atom, in order to try to see the atom, we use completely different methods. The methods we use for this have nothing to do with the term see. In the same way, we can't look inside the atom itself. It's technically impossible. And so, if we talk about how we would see an atom if we were to look at it, and if we ourselves were the size of an atom, then assuming we kept the same structure we have now, we wouldn't see anything. Neither we nor, in fact, the atom itself would interact with light. We wouldn't have touch, we wouldn't have smell, we wouldn't have vision, we wouldn't have anything at all. Remember how many times we've talked about the fact that emptiness is actually not empty? Remember how many times we've discussed that a true vacuum doesn't exist, and that even in a perfect vacuum, there's still some amount of matter present. But this matter isn't what we usually imagine when we think about how a vacuum is created in laboratory setups. It's not the kind of matter made up of stray molecules, isolated atoms, and so on. It's the kind of matter that exists at the very beginning of all substance. That's why I always say, don't confuse matter with substance. This is the kind of matter that consists of what is called quantum foam, of certain quantum fluctuations, of some kind of chaos that occurs at that level. At this level, there is always a lot of interesting stuff going on. If you've ever been interested in experiments conducted at colliders, then you definitely know that, for example, when particles collide, a lot of interesting and different effects occur, which change depending on the type of experiment. For instance, there's an effect known as pair production. This phenomenon seems absolutely incredible. And we imagine that a particle appeared out of nothing. Basically, that's exactly what it looks like. But most modern theories that try to describe the essence of this process and attempt to reconstruct its mechanism are based on the idea that there was no true vacuum, but rather some medium filled with a certain kind of matter. In this case, matter does not mean substance. Here, matter refers to things like quantum fluctuations, certain packets of energy present there, some virtual particles, and something that, for some reason, was unable to turn into either characteristic matter or specific substance. Accordingly, if we assume that we have become the size of an atom, but our senses remain intact, then at that scale we would already be able to see these strange fluctuations, this constant bubbling, and this absence of emptiness. And the phrase that is often used, that an atom is 90% empty space, would no longer be a reality for us. After all, modern physics describes the atom not as empty matter made up of scattered particles, but as a kind of seething ocean of mysterious phenomena, which also includes those particles that we have somehow managed to characterize. So yes, we approach the atom, we see its model, which somewhat resembles a planetary system, and we notice that this empty space between the nucleus and the electrons is filled with some kind of incomprehensible stuff. And now it's worth turning our attention to the nucleus itself and to the electrons. First of all, the nucleus is actually quite small. The nucleus occupies, let's say, a smaller part of the atom. This follows even from what we know about the periodic table. If you compare the radius of the atom to the size of the nucleus, you'll be surprised to find that it seems like everything should be empty. And so we would see in front of us some object that is about as tall as we are. Somewhere in the center there would be, I don't know, maybe about 1/20th of our size. That's the atomic nucleus. And somewhere around it, electrons would appear and disappear. The supposedly empty space between the electron and the atom will be filled with that very strange substance we've just discussed in such detail. The next point is our environment. We said that the atom is quite specific in this way, but what else will be around it? Well, if we imagine that we've approached a wall made up of such atoms, where each atom is the size of a person, then we wouldn't see a solid wall, but rather some strange dots around which life is swirling. These dots would be the nuclei of the atoms, and what is swirling around as life would either be empty space or electrons. And we wouldn't see any smooth wall at all. It would be a surface devoid of any mechanical properties. Essentially, it would be something completely incomprehensible. A sort of swarm of electrons swirling between the atoms, constantly appearing and disappearing. The electrons themselves would also look very strange. We remember that an electron cloud is, in essence, a region representing the probability distribution of where an electron might appear. Moreover, electrons are constantly appearing and disappearing depending on the probabilistic range of their distribution. And when we try to imagine what this would look like, well, it probably wouldn't look any simpler than that quantum foam we mentioned earlier. The electrons will be constantly appearing and disappearing. It will be bubbling, it will be flickering, and this will mostly happen in those areas where we have the electron cloud. We will see the very same images of electron clouds that we're used to seeing in chemistry textbooks. However, we said we would approach the atom. But is it even worth approaching the atom if we ourselves are the size of an atom? I think you can already guess why there might be problems here. If in the macro world, which we initially described and said that the main driving force there is gravity and simple mechanical contact, then at the atomic scale, where we already have quantum particles and where there is interaction between atoms, our main interaction becomes electrostatic. Why are atoms located next to each other? The main driving force here is electrostatic interaction. We have a positively charged nucleus capturing electrons from another atom. In this way, a pair is formed where there is Coulomb attraction. And in this way, essentially, atoms form the objects that we see. So, being at the scale of an atom, I'm afraid we would feel this interaction ourselves. It's quite possible that some clever nucleus would grab some of the electrons that are around our, let's say, organism, if we can call it that, around our model, our miniature copy, and start attracting this object to itself. But it will keep attracting it until we encounter another interesting phenomenon, repulsion. It's precisely this repulsion that allows us to touch macroscopic objects. The electrons surrounding the atom will sharply push us away in the opposite direction. At first we talked about attraction. This scenario is also possible. But if we keep moving forward and the electrons don't repel us, and instead one of the protons catches us, then we'll find ourselves in a constant cycle of attraction and repulsion. This will be an endless process, somewhat similar to what happens in a black hole when the hole itself tries to pull an object in and when it crosses the event horizon. As long as we are the size of an atom, we will remain suspended in this state of attraction and repulsion until something changes. And after all, nothing might change. The material could turn out to be quite stable, and for some reason, certain external factors might not have any effect. So we'll just hang there, neither here nor there, in some state of magnetic attraction. Of course, magnetic interaction has nothing to do with it here, but perhaps that's the easiest way to imagine it. So, maybe it would be better if the electrons just repelled us right away. That would be much more convenient. That's why we decide not to get too close to the atom while we're still the size of that atom, as long as there's a risk of getting caught in that zone of attraction, or, let's say, getting a kick in the rear. But you can get a kick in the rear, not only from an atom, not only from some material made up of those atoms, but also from individual particles. If, for example, we encounter a single proton or a single ion or something like that, the repulsion will also make us bounce off that element so forcefully that we would experience enormous g-forces, probably exceeding those experienced by astronauts during launch. The effect will be immediate. And that's how the Pauli exclusion principle works. But besides all that, we have something else interesting. We won't approach the atoms, but we will try to observe them. That's actually why we shrank in the first place. But how are we going to see them? Right now, we're trying to visualize them as some kind of static objects. We're trying to imagine, for example, that the wardrobe behind us is just standing there and not moving anywhere. The chair isn't moving anywhere either. However, despite all this, we are now embarking on an endless journey through the vastness of cosmic space. We will always see some movement in the world of subatomic particles, in the world of atoms. In fact, in the world of particles, nothing is stable, nothing is static. All objects are constantly pulsing, moving. And even if it's not movement in the mechanical sense, it's still the pulsation of certain centers of equilibrium. But quantum phenomena don't end there. After all, even at the atomic scale, Heisenberg's uncertainty will appear. And this means that when we try to see even something that we could try to catch with our eye, even a vibrating, supposedly material particle, we won't see its outlines. The uncertainty principle will be at work. We will see either its movement or its position. So, how is it best to imagine this? Exactly, it would be some kind of incomprehensible substance that behaves like jelly, constantly vibrating and twitching. And even if we manage to catch it with our gaze and see some specific object that is moving, we still won't see any clear outlines. In other words, these will be some kind of blurred clouds of probability, which are very difficult for us to even imagine at our macroscopic level. By the way, speaking of mobility, with this level of movement at such speeds, on such a scale, and with so much surrounding us, we wouldn't be able to stand still for even a minute. Either we'd be killed by some fast moving particle flying by, or something like that would happen. The atomic world is a world of constant collisions, a world of constant interactions, and a world of ongoing effects related to repulsion, attraction, and various other relationships between particles. When we shrink down to the size of an atom, it's like finding ourselves in the middle of a 6-lane ring road during rush hour. There's always something happening there. And so, our attempt to move through such a world would be equivalent to a moose trying to cross a 12-lane highway. The effect would be about the same. Of course, there would have to be heavy traffic on that road because maybe at night he could actually do it. The next question is the question of perception of time. We're used to the fact that, for us, the flow of time goes like this. And yes, we know that in physics, time is a very relative and highly subjective thing. And this is exactly where it will show itself. Human consciousness is oriented toward perceiving certain processes at a certain speed. And yes, we can say that time flows at one speed in the morning and at another in the evening, that while you're riding the subway, time drags on endlessly, or when you're busy with something boring, it's the same. But all of these are specific features that fit within the peculiarities of, again, our perception. But there are more serious aspects that are connected to the level of the given object. And so, at the scale of the atomic range, our perception of time will be completely different. The speeds present there are sometimes comparable to near-light speeds. Near-light speeds, first of all, mean relativistic effects, which will be abundant there. And secondly, strictly speaking, this is also a relativistic effect, the change in the rate at which a process unfolds. All processes will seem extremely slow to us, and as long as we remain within the measured scale of atoms, we won't be able to analyze what is happening. That is why, strictly speaking, it would probably have been best to say the most important thing right at the beginning. Even if a technical experiment to reduce the size of an atom could be carried out, even if we could technically perceive what we want to see and could use the term see, the physics of the processes themselves would not allow us to do anything. There are two possibilities here. Either we completely lose our minds and go insane, or we will see it in a completely strange and incomprehensible way. Human consciousness is incomparable to the consciousness of the quantum realm. While we can still somehow imagine the issue of slowing down processes, we simply cannot visualize various quantum phenomena at all.